part of the application was writing I think it was a one-page summary of the memoir that you were working on. And writing that page summary really crystallized. I had always wanted to write a book, but it kind of put that book idea that had been floating around in like little puzzle pieces in my brain into a more singular, coherent picture. And I knew that I wanted to write that book.
That's today's guest, Hannah Howard. No, you don't need an MFA to write a book, but for her, even the application process helped her crystallize her vision for what became her first book, Feast.
Originally, the book was going to be so much more of an almost journalistic, less memoir, less personal premise about these inspiring, interesting women in the food world. And as I was working on like really early drafts with my writers group, they were all like, oh, we like the personal stuff. We want to hear more about that. So I just started to kind of lean into that more and more.
She also shares how her second book evolved into a richer, more relationship-based food memoir. Plus, we discuss her experience in a low-residency MFA, the reactions she's gotten to her writing about ED, how her niche is expanding into parenting, and more in today's episode. There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. Welcome to The Bleeders, a podcast and support group about book writing and publishing. I'm writer and podcaster Courtney Kosak, and each week I'll bring you new conversations with authors, agents, and publishers about how to write and sell books.
Hi, my name is Hannah Howard. I'm the author of 2 memoirs, Feast, True Love in and Out of the Kitchen, and Plenty, a memoir of food and family. And I write about food a lot, and I teach food writing classes.
So I took Catapult's 12-month essay generator to write the first draft of my essay collection. And at the end of the program, we each got matched with a professional reader to give us notes on our manuscript. Hannah was my reader.
I'm so excited to do this. I think there's a real wisdom in that I was matched up with you after having read your books now in their entirety. So I'm really grateful for that. And it like really helped me, not like I was able to process your notes before anyway, but like on a deeper level, I was like, oh, and it gave me some ideas. So anyway, thank you.
Cool, that's awesome. I thought so too. Like they did a thoughtful matchmaking with both of us.
Yes. So we're going to get into both of your books, but first let's do a quick lightning round. So when did you first identify as a writer?
I always identified as a writer. I made my first air quotes book maybe when I could first start to write. You know, I was putting pieces together, and I always felt like there was something magical about books. So when I was in middle school, I had a zine about the adventures that I had with my friends.
That's so cute.
It was called Power Dreams. And then I got into a program. I went to high school in New Jersey, and I got into this Governor's School for the Arts program for writing. And that's when I felt like my writing was kind of validated by an outside source who said that I was somewhat good at it. And I loved these writing friends that I made that summer. And I loved being able to just be a full nerd and just write and read. Like that made me incredibly happy. So I think those kind of things together really firmed up my identity as a writer.
I love that. So when you went to college, did you have that inkling in your mind that like that would maybe be a career that you would pursue, or did you think that was unrealistic as a career?
I thought it was unrealistic as a career. I thought it was a love that people had told me, like, oh, if you're a great writer, maybe you could be a lawyer because that involves communication skills, or, you know, ways that you could sort of translate some aspects of writing into something more supposedly practical. I majored in anthropology. I also majored in creative writing, which I was the first, it just became a major at my college. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do it. And the amazing head of the department suggested that everyone also major in something else so that we had something to write about. But I kind of, but I think that that's kind of wise in a way. Like writers always need something to write about. And I've sometimes resented having other jobs that weren't so creative or that weren't so pure, but they've given me so much, sometimes in terms of material or just in terms of way to like exercise my brain in other ways that I think have come back to better and deepen my writing ultimately.
That's super wise. And that wound up being true for you too, in the way that your niche developed. Anyway, we'll come back to that. What's your all-time favorite book?
Oh my gosh, this question is hard. I really struggle to pare it down to one, but kind of the first book that blew my mind in a sort of adult way was Crime and Punishment, which I read for a psychoanalytic interpretation of literature class, and just like all of the incredible layers of it really blew my mind, even though I haven't revisited it for a while.
What's your dream writing routine? Like if you had your druthers, what's the fantasy version?
I am a huge coffee shop, sort of ambient noise writer. So I would love to just take my laptop somewhere beautiful and a little like fun and full of some good people watching when my brain needed a break, and camp out and drink a embarrassing number of lattes and write my heart out. I think that's my ideal.
Amazing. And juxtaposed against your real writing routine.
Unfortunately, my real writing routine has been very hardly existed at all recently since I've had a second baby. I've just been so sleep deprived that when I have some moments to write, everything feels a little fuzzy. But that being said, so when I do get a chance to write, I'll take like any really, if I do have a little bit of focus and clarity and time, I'll do it, whether it's like on my couch, in my bed, I am there.
You don't have to wait for the fantasy. You're just digging in.
I'll meet it where it comes, exactly.
So quick follow-up on that, because I read in your book that you're like an on and off journaler, which I very much am too. So how do you apply that to your... because you have new babies and I'm sure you have like memories you want to preserve and stuff like that. So what's your current journaling routine?
I am the queen of buying, this is my latest, like I'm all about a nice notebook that I like fill up like 4 pages of and then abandon for a new nice notebook with the intentions of filling it to the end. And right now I'm all about, I do want to capture these memories, even though they're like tired and hazy. So I have a million notes on my phone that are like half thoughts. Some of them are like 4 words and I look back on them and wonder what I could possibly have meant. But some of them are a little bit more fully formed than that. So yeah, and I've never done this before until now, but I've also left some like voice memos for myself, just if I feel even that writing is beyond me, just to kind of get some memories down and make something real by putting it somewhere, by documenting it.
That's great. So I am also, like I said, a sporadic journaler, but being an audio person too, I have in the last couple of years started leaving myself voice memos and like doing kind of a diary that way too, which you can hear like where you're at, which is kind of fun. When you listen back, you're like, oh my God, you get more context.
Yes. I never had this until the pandemic, but I have like voice memo relationships where I'll just catch up with friends. Like, I guess we're our schedules are too weird to actually have a phone call. So we'll just leave each other these messages on voice notes, and it feels too unwieldy for a text. And it's so nice. I've gone back and listened, and it's just such a nice thing to get to hear someone's voice and hear them chatting to you. And you can listen again. You can listen anytime. I find that really lovely.
Yeah. What's one piece of writing that makes you jealous you didn't write it?
This is of something that just came out that I just read that I was in awe of. Melissa Febos, who's a writer I really love and admire. And I got to hang out with her a little bit when she was at Bennington. And she wrote this essay for the New York Times Magazine about her breast reduction surgery. And I just found it so, like everything she writes, so thoughtful and smart and real and vulnerable, and all of those things together just really brought it home to me. And I had a breast reduction when I was in high school, and I've written about it like a very little bit, and it made me, I was like, oh, I wish I wrote this essay. It's so good.
Yeah, when someone knocks it out of the park on one of your own stories, you're like, oh, good job.
Yeah, exactly.
Son of a bitch. No.
Exactly.
Okay, so we'll dive into the books, but first I want to talk about Bennington for a second, because I know you don't have to have an MFA to write a book, but I would like to unpack like what parts of the experience contributed to your writing process and knowledge of the publishing industry, and I don't know, anything that didn't.
Absolutely. So I think I had a kind of unique experience in that I actually received my book deal and my MFA acceptance the same week. So I'm very lucky. I already had a book deal. But the book deal kind of came because I applied to MFA programs the year before and did not get in. But one of the programs I applied to, the Hunter Memoir program, which did not, I called to see what the status was on my application. And they're like, well, we can't tell you yet, but we can tell you that you didn't make our short list and you didn't make our long list. And I was like, oh, fine, I get it.
That's rude. Telling me, okay.
But, yeah. But so no shade at them, but just a little shade at them. But I'm grateful for them because part of the application was writing I think it was a 1-page summary of the memoir that you were working on. Oh. And writing that page summary really crystallized. I had always wanted to write a book, but it kind of put that book idea that had been floating around in like little puzzle pieces in my brain into a more singular, coherent picture. And I knew that I wanted to write that book. I always knew I wanted to write a book, but this was the book that would become Feast, my first book. And I thought, this is the book that I want to write. So that was really, really helpful. And then, publishing is really slow. I had been used to writing for the web where, you write something Tuesday, you edit it Wednesday, it gets published Thursday, and then everyone forgets about it by Friday. Mm-hmm, so this whole process, I think I found my amazing agent through a coworker. He was working in video for a website I was working on. And I discovered he wrote a book about lucid dreaming. And knowing that I wanted to write a book, I was like, oh, tell me everything about the process. How did it go? What'd you do? And he's like, well, you have to if you're going to do it the sort of traditional way, you need an agent. And I think you would really like my agent. And I was like, okay, great. And so he introduced us over email. I sent her this 1-page about my memoir that I had written for Hunter. And she's like, oh, I love this. Send me more. And then I panicked because the more that I had was a total mess of notes and ideas. I certainly didn't have a book proposal. And I asked her what she was hoping for. And she said, just send me everything that you have. And so I did. I sent her this mess. And she ended up signing me and really helping me turn that mess into a book proposal, which took about a year.
Nice.
And then, so I think that was around 2015. So then in 2016, as we were shopping it, and I was getting so many rejections, many of which were very lovely rejections that would rave about certain things but say no thank you. I finally got an acceptance. And while this was going on, I was working as a copywriter for Marie's Cheese. It was a great job in many ways. I got to eat so much amazing cheese, but I kind of felt like this more of the writing that was in my voice was my side hustle. I would pitch essays and stories here and there. And I really hoped to move that more to the center of my professional life. And so for me, the book was part of that. And the MFA was also part of it. I had considered an MFA for a long time, but kind of thought it's expensive. I don't really need it. And then I thought like, well, I don't really need it, but I really want it. It just seems like a awesome creative opportunity to get to like spend the time and the effort working on the writing that I cared about. And that turned out to be correct. It really was. And it actually worked out so well, this timing of, so I sold my book on proposal. You can sell a nonfiction book with a proposal or a whole manuscript. And so I had about 50 pages, which meant I had to write the rest of the book. I mean, if anyone listening, or if you get the opportunity to write a book with the support of an MFA program, it's kind of ideal, because I remember one time getting some feedback from my editor that was so abstract and big picture that I had no idea what I actually was supposed to do. Like I was like, like that sounds great, but I don't know how to implement that at all. And so I brought it to, and at Bennington, where I got my MFA, you worked with a different faculty advisor every term. And at that point, I was working with Joan Wickersham, who's an amazing writer. And I just told her what my editor had said and was like, help. And she did. She was like, this is what I would do. And I followed her advice and it worked out. So I feel like I was in this really loving, supportive cocoon to help me write this book, which is really daunting to write a book. So I'm really grateful for Bennington. The timing was really cool because I started the program in 2016 when I started my book deal, and then the book came out in 2018, right before I graduated from the program. And so nice. We had like a little book party for me at the last residency, and it kind of was like a journey that I got to do both of those things together.
Did you have also like a cohort of non-faculty fellow student writers that you were able to bounce ideas off of, and do you stay in touch with those people?
Definitely. That was the best part, I think, of the program. And what I didn't, like I signed up for it because I wanted that time to focus on my writing. And then my favorite part was meeting these fellow writers who were just people who like loved books and words as much as I did. And yeah, they were great. Yes, I have stayed in touch with a bunch of them. They've just become really wonderful friends. Like they're really cool people from all walks of life. One of the cool things, Bennington is a low residency MFA, which means a lot of them had careers and families and like full, it's adults, not necessarily like people right out of college. And so it was just fascinating. Like my classmates, one of them was a doctor, one of them they just had all kinds of stories. One of them was a French professor, one of them was like a mom of 5. They all had different things going on, and they all brought so much perspective and richness to my writing life and my regular person life too.
That's great. Yeah, that was the thing about the catapult thing that I did too. It was like a mini MFA in that way, and we all got to know each other's writing, which is so helpful. It also gives you context for like the notes that they're giving you. You know what I mean? When you can put it through that filter of like, oh, well, I know all these things about this person and whatever. It gives me extra information. And I just think like in the way that your coworker helped you, by being like, I think you would love my agent. So helpful to find your writer tribe so that you can tap in for those reasons too.
Yeah, and we've all supported each other, right, in the ways that are more kind of, right, just by being a friend and by providing feedback on notes. And then things like when I went on book tour for Feast, I got to go see like one of the friends of mine from my MFA was in Chicago, and she worked at a bookstore, and I got to go to her bookstore. And then her friend was worked at a beer bar, and I did an event at his bar because he was doing like a beer talk over books. And, it was like all very full circle and very cool to get to, have all these synergies and connect with people in different ways.
Okay, so let's get into Feast. So set everybody up with the premise of that book.
Yes, so Feast, True Love in and Out of the Kitchen was my first book, and it's a memoir, and it's about my experience working my way through restaurants and falling in love with food while struggling with a pretty brutal eating disorder and recovering from that eating disorder.
Yeah, very relatable. So you gave us a little bit about the genesis of the idea, but I guess fill in those gaps in the writing process. So you did a lot of the writing in that MFA program. Like, how long did your first draft take? When did it look like the version you landed on? And then I want to talk editing process.
Yeah, it was really intimidating to me. Just like I got this book deal, which was a dream, but then it's like, oh, I have to write a book. I've never written a book before. So in the book proposal, I think writing a book proposal can be such a great exercise because you have to write an outline, and I hate writing an outline. I remember when they like taught you about writing an outline, I don't know, middle school maybe, I would reverse engineer it so that I would like write the essay first and then write my outline because I just don't think, I'm someone who thinks on the page, like I think through writing. So it didn't really make sense for me to write an outline. And I don't think I followed it particularly closely, but it did force me to think through, like, how is this book going to unfold? What is the general arc? What is the general beginning, middle, and end? So let's see. So the book, it starts like the first chapter is my last kind of epic binge in my 20s. And then I go back and the rest of it is pretty much chronological order. I worked my way through various like restaurants, boyfriends, and eating disorder phases, and then kind of come out the other side. So for me, the structure was one of the biggest challenges as I was feeling daunted by this big, I think my contract said 60,000 words. I believe Feast is like 75,000 words, which is pretty much like a medium-sized book. It just sounds like a lot of words, 75,000 words. But I was really good at writing 1,000-word essays. So I told myself I just have to write 75 1,000-word essays. And of course, that's not exactly it.
That's
but
a good
in
hack,
some
though,
ways,
mentally. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It like really helped me feel like a little like, okay, I can do this. And that was a lot of my process is like 1,000 words chunks. And I just really like started to write. I wrote. And then I did a lot of the lifting of like creating that coherence, creating that like, I think that mysterious challenge of a book where it feels connected and where you like want to keep turning the page. I feel like a lot of that for me happened in editing. I experienced a lot of the writing process is like just kind of diving in and like getting out as much as I could. And it was hard. I wrote about like some really tough times in my life, and I felt like I was in a pretty good place when I was writing. Like I was in a recovery for a while, several years under my belt. I was writing about some really destructive exes, and I was in this really happy relationship that is now with my husband. So like there's a lot of good stuff going on, but I felt like for me to kind of capture the toughness, I had to really like parachute myself into the heart of the very worst, hardest, shittiest moments. And there's like no way around that for me. So it was really hard. Like I started to see a therapist again for the first time in a while. I kind of surprised myself with how, because people ask like, oh, was it healing? Is it cathartic? For me, what did feel healing and cathartic was like came later, the talking about it and kind of like getting it out in the world. That was like, oh. But the doing it was just kind of miserable in a way. But it was like that misery, like it felt good in a way, but it was all a good hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, when you're like, conjuring up these demons from your past, did you have any methods for tapping into that, or did you just sit with it? You know what I mean? Were you looking through old pictures? Were you looking through old emails, or were you just like, no, I'm going to sit in this stillness and like remember these things I normally try to forget?
I think a little bit of both, but more the latter. Like people ask me too, how did you remember? And I started with those memories that did feel like just really visceral and intense. And like, I couldn't forget them if I tried. But then for me, I do feel like the writing was sort of like a teleporting, like the actual process of sitting there. I mean, I'm not, some people are by hand kind of writers. I have to type because I feel like I'm too slow by hand. So just like in my Word doc, but really like I thought of the Word doc as like, I'm there. We're in my demons, as you said, which is true. And then as the words and sentences and paragraphs built upon themselves, more things would come up, which was really interesting to me. Like the process of writing about them unearthed more memories. Yeah, that was interesting. And I did once in a while kind of poke back into like, did that person say that? Can I find some old email or something? But I think I know that memory is fallible, but it's a memoir. And so memory is like in the title, right?
Totally.
And so, yeah. And so I feel like I'm being true to the memory. To me means being true to like how it felt and not necessarily like the journalistic integrity of like, yeah.
I've gotten a lot better about my perspective about that. But for a while I was be like, is it exact? And it's like, no, it can't be exact. So like nobody was there beside you at the tape recorder. Like there might be instances that you can find and fact check yourself, but that's not usually how it works. And people don't normally expect that. Anyway, good thing to let go of. Okay, so on that note, and I'm curious if this came out in the edit. So there are some landmark people and institutions in Feast, food people and like Houston's, I guess. But not all of them are identified. And how did you choose which people you could identify? And how did you figure out which things people would have to figure out on their own?
Let's see. My general guideline was I wanted to be honest and kind. I feel like it's hard to write. I don't mind disclosing my own secrets so much, but it's very sensitive to write about other people, right? There's a legal read that happened that informed a lot, actually. Like I was kind of nervous, like Houston's. One of the reasons I didn't mind mentioning it by name is it's this like big company. And I was expecting that to maybe not be kosher according to like, I don't know, some of because they have lawyers but the lawyer wasn't concerned with that because most of what I said was pretty like complimentary of Houston's, which I was like, oh, okay, I was pretty miserable, but it wasn't the institution's fault.
Right.
The things that I had to take out were like, there was I'll just leave it in this broad way. I think that's okay. Like I had written in a draft about an ex-boyfriend's suicide attempt, and that got nixed because I can understand that's like a private thing. Whereas there's another ex, and I talk about his like alcoholism and drug struggles. And I was like, well, how come I can leave that? And the lawyer said that like enough people were privy to that, that it wasn't necessarily privileged. Whereas this suicide attempt was more of like only a small number of people knew about that. And when I was talking to my editor about kind of planning for that, she said, she's an editor and edits nonfiction books and memoir all the time. And she said that even after doing this for years and years, she never really knows like what's going to come up with the legal read. So I'm glad that happened. But I just try, it's hard. It's really, really hard to like write about other people. And I just really tried my best to like have my own integrity about it, to be as generous but as truthful as I could muster. And I left it at that.
Tell me about the editing process, because in the acknowledgments, there's, I believe, Morgan Parker, and then your editor at Little A also for Feast. So like, what did you tackle in each of those rounds, and how'd they leave their mark?
Yeah. So Morgan was my acquiring editor. She's like an amazing poet, and she was working at Little A at the time. And I was really excited to work with her. We knew each other from college, actually. Not super well, but like we had a poetry class together. So I was really excited about that, especially because it was such a personal book, and I felt like that kind of connection. And Morgan was the one who gave that abstract advice that I couldn't. And I think it's because she's a poet first, right? And an editor second, maybe. And it was kind of like, her advice was like poetry. So she was so helpful in thinking about the big picture of the book. She was the one who believed in it at first and like wanted to publish it and everything. So I owe her so much. And then I was nervous when she took me to lunch and she told me she was leaving to go pursue her poetry and other writing. And I was really excited for her, but really nervous for me. And then I just ended up with Laura Vanderveer, who was the next editor at Little A, who they hired and paired me with. And I just got so lucky because Laura was an amazing editor and also I think an editor rather than a writer, and just so really adept and knew how to communicate with authors. And I feel like I got really lucky. I got the dream team and like they shaped it together. And she saw me through the second round of edits, the second part of the project, and really kind of polishing and tightening and making like an almost book into an actual book.
So you mentioned like you open with this big last binge and then you go back to the beginning and then the rest of it's kind of chronological. So did that come out in the proposal or did you figure that out in the edit, that kind of structure for it? And I have to say, Feast was so helpful because you gave me a note about structure and then seeing it so cleanly done, I was like, yes. I need to do that.
That's because I struggled with it. Oh my gosh, I don't remember like where exactly I came. I think I was a Bennington professor who was like, when all else fails, like just chronological order is a brilliant thing. Like that's how we usually tell stories. Like this happened and then that happened and then this happened. So while there are other ways to tell a story for sure, especially if you're writing like essays or something like that, there's a reason it's kind of the first. And I think it often really works. And it really did work for me. And it did take me, I'm not sure like when that light bulb went off that was the right way, but it took me a while. I think I had some other more bouncing around drafts for quite a while. And I felt like that was a big moment in the book coming together because I really struggled with that.
Any other big things about Feast that you think are important for people to know or things you learned in the process?
I mean, I was really I decided to write a book about my eating disorder largely, which was for so many years like my deepest, darkest secret. And so it was kind of a crazy thing to do in some ways to like take that and then be like, this is the thing that I'm going to share with the world in a really public way. And I was really nervous about what people would think. You know, at that time, I was really building my career as a food writer. Was I going to ruin the whole thing? Because then I would be like, none of those fears materialized at all. You know, I think so often the stuff that is really hard to write about and scary to write about is the juicy, good stuff that is going to move and inspire people. And so that's just my little like TED talk. It's like, don't be afraid to go there because I feel like that's what resonated with people. And when people said like, you know, it made me feel a little less alone, I was like so moved because that was what I was trying to do. I was kind of like writing for that 18-year-old Hannah who felt like incredibly alone and isolated and ashamed.
That's great. Would you say it helped with your recovery in its own weird way?
Yeah, I think kind of like coming out with it did. When I first started to tell people, because it's not really something you talk about, like, oh yeah, I had an eating disorder. The primary response I got was people saying, like, me too. Like they also struggled with an eating disorder. So people I never expected, like friends, or people would say, oh, my sister did, or, my mom did my whole life, or people, everyone had someone. And at first it was so heartening because it was just that reminder that I'm not alone, which is like, I need that reminder. But then it became really depressing. Like, oh, again, like more people have to go through this. But I do feel like it's healing to come out with it. It's scary, and it hasn't always been easy. I've had my moments, but in general, I felt that a lot more cathartic than the actual writing.
So let's move on to Plenty. Set up the premise for this one.
So in some ways, Plenty is a sequel, and in other ways, it's its own thing. It's also a memoir, but this stage in my life talks about kind of more of living in recovery and meeting my now husband and deciding to start a family. And then there's also an element of me trying to create and build a community of women in the food world, which I do through profiling a chef, a sommelier, a barista, a cheesemaker, these kind of women in the trenches of the food and hospitality world who I admire.
Okay, so you wrote the proposal for this while you were actually right before you got pregnant with your daughter. Am I right on that?
That's correct. Yeah.
And so because that's a huge thread in the story. So I'm curious, like, what the proposal looked like originally and when you really decided to pull that thread through.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't plan. It's not like you'd be like, and it's going to end with me having a baby, or you know what I mean?
Right. I wrote the chapter, the last, I hope it's not too big of a spoiler alert, but the last chapter is I have the baby. And I wrote that, like, I had already sent in the rest of the book, and I wrote it like I was like deliriously postpartum. Yeah. So actually, originally the book was going to be so much more of an almost journalistic, less memoir, less personal premise about these inspiring, interesting women in the food world. And as I was working on like really early drafts with my writers group, they were all like, oh, we like the personal stuff. We want to hear more about that. So I just started to like kind of lean into that more and more. Yeah, so it wasn't like I didn't have the outline to the end, but I knew that to me, like I wanted to explore the connection of food and family, and my mom also is a chapter, so it's kind of looking to future generations and to past generations in my family. And I was lucky enough, so Laura, my editor from Feast, kind of also helped to talk through the book with me and the idea for the book in its early stages and what it would be. So I had that kind of leg up. I feel like second books are, I wrote my Bennington MFA thesis about second books because I was like really interested in this idea. And I remember I listened to this podcast with Elizabeth Gilbert then, where she said something, I like wrote it all down because it was so good, that your first book, if you write it when you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, doesn't matter. This has been like marinating with you all of those years, all of your life. It's like been a part of you, right? And you've been like processing, and now you're putting it down. And then it's like, oh, what is the second book? So it's just like a whole new challenge, and it's really close to my heart. And I'm really glad that I kind of wrote in real time about losing a pregnancy, about my miscarriage, and then about my pregnancy, and then about these really early COVID days. Like I was writing about them as they were happening. So it was a really different experience than writing about things that happened many years before that I had already like thoroughly digested and reflected upon. I was really like writing as it was happening.
Yeah, you could feel that. And I think that is like a cool distinction between the two books. It's like, yes, that first book has been in the incubator forever, but there's so much possibility when the well isn't totally full, and like what is it going to be?
Yeah.
And as far as the profiles, like how did you pick the people and how did that all come together?
It kind of got more and more about myself and my journey writing the book almost. I had originally just put together this pretty unwieldy list of women in the food world that I admired. And originally a lot of them were kind of like big deal celebrities, and I would like get a message back from their publicist, and then they said they could set up an interview. And it felt kind of like, and I did a few of these interviews. And then I remember I talked to a woman who was a business owner, and she was like, well, what's your like target market for the book? And I was like, I don't know. I just want to but I'm glad she said that, because it kind of crystallized that like my target market for this book is that I don't have a target market.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the publisher has a target market, but like I don't think that's my job as a writer. And like I pivoted to, instead of just writing about women that were objectively like impressive, I wanted to write about people that I loved, people that like I thought were really cool and like wanted them to be part of my life. I think that comes across in the book.
Definitely.
And it was just so much more fun for me. And like one of the earlier chapters is about this woman, Paula, who was like a friend I met online. She teaches cooking online. And I just like hit it off with her. And I was like, I wanted her to be my friend regardless. And then I wanted to write about her. So it's kind of this awesome way in. And I wrote about going to Oslo with her. And like, I probably would have gone anyway, but knowing that I was going to write about it, that it was going to be part of this book, made it feel even more kind of like legit in my mind.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much because, yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm sure you could do it, but braiding together like all these things that are happening in your personal life with these kind of sterile, like you get 30 minutes with this high profile person, it doesn't kind of work as nicely as what wound up happening in Plenty. So your editor was totally cool that it had evolved into something else.
Yeah, she was really happy with it. And I feel really lucky that she was so open to these evolutions. But I think by the time I had the proposal, I knew it wasn't a complete departure. I knew it was going to be a little more personal. I knew that the women that I was going to talk about were going to be just people that I personally admired, not necessarily celebrities. And she was really open to like letting that unfold, which I'm very grateful for.
And then what was the editing process like this time around? And did you feel like you were more prepared for it, or how did it go down?
Yeah, it felt a little bit less like completely intimidating because I had done it once before. So I just had that little bit of confidence. Like I have done this thing. It's still incredibly scary to like hit send and then wait. I think it was a few months before I got any word back. And I was just like, oh, did I write? What did I, you have no idea. I feel like a writer has no objectivity about their own work, And then I always get afraid to like revisit. And also sometimes it's like, it just feels kind of painful to like go back. But I had a really good experience editing. I feel like if you're lucky enough to work with a great editor, they have this like great laser vision where they see where you're going and they get you the rest of the way there. So I feel like she just really had a way of saying like, just like add a little more here. Like you're not quite there yet. Like dig a little deeper. And that really made the book better. So I'm really grateful to the editing process and for her.
Nice. And then I saw there was like a brief mention that a couple of the articles had been published online before the proposal. So I was curious what pieces those were and then how you approached repurposing them. Is that right?
Oh, yes. I think that's right. That's right. I mean, I wrote about Eat Offbeat. So I wrote about one of the women in my book is Manal, who has a company called Eat Offbeat that cooks food from refugee chefs. And I had wrote a profile of her for Salon. I don't know if there were more. I think that might have been it. But I had also written, I think for Catapult, actually, I wrote a little bit about like my story of my miscarriage and everything, and a little bit about my body image during that experience. Officially, I didn't think I had to have any notes like that for Feast, but I almost felt kind of guilty because I think this is true. Like most writers kind of revisit topics, and I had written before about working in restaurant with an eating disorder. I wrote before about like certain things that came up again, but I think that's okay. And they come up in different contexts and different ways. It's so different when they're part of a book than when it's like a little snippet of a short profile. I mean, I think people sometimes are like afraid if they put something out there that that's it and they cannot like revisit it, or that then it's like done. But I don't necessarily think that's true. I think most places are open to the idea that things will get like
rewritten or turned into something else. Yeah. And as a reader, I have to say it's delightful for me. Like, Cheryl Strait, I can think of a couple things that she's written about where it'll be like, oh, and then you get another angle on it or like a different perspective on it. And it's
awesome. As a reader, you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I like that.
Yes, and I think sometimes as a writer, especially if we're writing personal things, like we think that they're in our heads so much that we think everyone is like privy to that, but actually no
Right.
one else is in your head. And it might feel to me, I'm like, here we go again. But that doesn't feel that way to someone else. Like they're not there with me. So I have to remind myself of that. It's new to them, even if it's, I think there's some marketing thing about, or advertising thing that you have to see something.
Yes.
I could be wrong on this. 7 times, is that you have to see something 7
I think
times?
it's 7 times.
Yeah. So if you have to see something 7 times, if you have like a small echo, it's not going to, I think it takes a lot more than that for it to get old.
So with Plenty and with Feast, you narrated both books for Audible. What was that experience like?
It was really cool, actually. I had to audition to do it. I'm not someone who's like done things. I know you're an actor, but I've never really auditioned before. So I was like, oh my God. But I passed. They let me. Because, I thought to audition because they had me fill out a form at the publisher. And like, what does the protagonist of the book sound like? And I was like, they sound like me. And then in filling this out, I'm like, well, I should do it. So I asked if I could. And they said, maybe if you can. I guess it's nice that they don't want someone who sounds like terrible or something to read the book. So for the first one, they flew me out to this studio in Michigan. Brilliance Publishing, it is. And I sit in this tiny booth. And it's wild. Like, I put on these big earphones and I kind of felt like my voice was like reverberating in my brain. And it's such a weird intimacy with your own words, because if you mess up, you have to go back to where before you mess up. And so in order to not mess up, you have to be very present. So you're just like in this very focused little tiny cocoon with your own work, which is very strange, but also kind of fun. And I really liked it. And then when I recorded the next book, it was COVID times. And I'm so grateful that I got to work with the same lovely director that I worked with for Feast. And he like zoomed in to the studio in Brooklyn that was near where I was living. I was really quite pregnant. It was a huge heat wave in summer, and the air conditioning was broken. So it was like miserable, I have to say, a miserable experience. but first, but it was still fun in some ways. But in that way, it was like, oh my gosh, I had like the huge iced coffee and a huge iced water, and I was just like sweaty. Again, with like the slowness of publishing. So like it took, I finished writing the book. It was like I had just had the baby. I sent in the first draft. So that was spring of 2020. And it didn't come out until fall of 2021. Like that's just like kind of a normal pace for publishing. But like by fall of 2021, I was pregnant with the next baby. So my life had changed a lot.
Okay, so what's next for you? And like you've built a brand as a food writer, but that means more than just food. You're writing about people and relationships and stuff too. But what is on your docket? Anything that you can share? And then what's on your bucket list?
Yeah, I'm still figuring it out. I feel like, what is the next chapter? I'm the editor-in-chief of parent.com. It's my new day job, and I'm excited about it.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, it's like I've been working in the food world for so long, and I will always love food, but parenting is a big part of my life as a new mom. And so it's kind of fun to get to dig into a different topic that also, just like food, touches on so much, touches on culture and bodies and traditions and, just anything, history and parenting too. Like we all have parents. It's just this huge, juicy potential of topics. So I'm enjoying that. And I wrote another book proposal that nobody seems interested in. So about multi-level marketing. If you're a publisher and you want to,
that sounds interesting to me.
It's just something that I've been fascinated with for so long. And then like the Lula Rich documentary came out, and I just thought it would be a really good book, and I still do, but no publishers think that so far.
Hello, publishers.
Yeah. But it's still possible that a publisher will think that, and that's okay if not. There's so many stories to tell, and I'm not sure what the next one will be, but I'm excited to see what it is. I mean, I love the process of writing, and I also really have enjoyed the process of like promoting a book. I know some people don't feel that way, but for me, it's like really writing is so solitary, and it's me and the laptop, and it feels really gratifying to be able to like take it out into the world and talk to people, and like I get to talk to you, and that's for me really exciting too. But it's also kind of exciting to like marinate and think about like what are the next things, and brainstorm and be in that early phase where you're not even working yet, you're just dreaming. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I love that. And any like bucket list writing goals? Or just keep doing it?
Yeah, keep doing it. I mean, I feel so lucky that I get to write books. I would like to write something for the New Yorker one day. That's kind of a big dream of mine.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now for the postscript segment, just a few final words of advice that you can put in your pocket and take for the road.
So what's one piece of writing advice you wish you could give your former self?
To just keep writing. As hard as it is, it gets easier. Sometimes you just have to like sit there and type and do the thing. Some of it will be amazing, some of it will be garbage, but all of it will be worthwhile.
That's good. One tip for writers trying to get a book published.
I think keep talking to writers who have gotten a book published. I feel like having those kind of people just a few steps in front of me on the path was really helpful to ask for advice and what it was like. I think people can be weirdly secretive about it, so I like to not be secretive and share about my experience. So if you can find some people who are open in that way, that's great. And I think it's the same thing as kind of any like artistic endeavor where you're putting yourself out there, is like just don't let the rejections go get you down. I know it's 1,000 times easier said than done because they hurt every time, but like just don't let them stop you. You'll have to find the right moment, the right person, and sometimes there's just like luck and timing, but it will happen if you keep at it.
Nice. What's your all-time favorite piece of your own writing?
I think it's my last book. It's Plenty. I feel I don't know if that is a book too long for a piece, but I feel pretty proud of it.
I highly recommend picking up a copy of Hannah's food memoirs, Feast and Plenty. Hannah also teaches writing classes, and I can tell you from experience, she gives very thoughtful notes. So look her up online for more info.
My website is hannahhoward.nyc, and you can find more of my writing there and upcoming classes and everything.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is such a good
Thank
combo.
you for having me. I'm so excited.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Bleeders. Writing is so much better with friends. I'm your host, Courtney Kosak, and hey, let's connect on social media. I am at Courtney Kosak. Last name is Kocak on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you're signed up for the Bleeders Companion Substack for all kinds of newsletter exclusives. There's so much good stuff that I send out to my free list, and I actually just launched a paid subscription with some extra goodies where I take you behind the scenes of all my best bylines. I published a post about my return to stand-up comedy and how I got ready to crush my showcase. I wrote about MFAs and whether or not I think it is worth it. I also did one of my favorite workshops I've ever taught. It's a manifestation workshop that I did for the new year, but it's really good any time of the year. So there's so much good stuff for free subscribers and even more for paid subscribers. And there is a link in the description for that. And join me again next time for another all-new episode. In the meantime, happy bleeding!